A recent public memorial held out at State Farm Stadium in Arizona wasn't really just about marking the end of a life. It became this huge political and spiritual spectacle. Honestly, one of the most covered, and you could argue one of the most complex events in modern American conservatism.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We've gone through the sources detailing this gathering. And, well, the truth is, it was way more than just a somber funeral.
Right. It was this massive, really highly charged mix of, politics, deep grief, and some very fervent faith. Our mission here, like always on Tizen, is to give you the shortcut.
Yeah.
To help you understand the currents running underneath all the headlines.
And what jumps out immediately when you look at the source material is just the sheer jarring duality of the whole thing.
Duality, how so?
Well, you have this moment right in the middle of it where a widow is performing this incredibly moving, very public act of Christian forgiveness, shattering, really.
Yeah.
And then, almost immediately after, you hear these fiery calls for political retribution, talk of what some commentators were even framing as a holy war, right from that same stage.
Yeah.
So this deep dive, this is your key to unlocking that sequence. How does personal grief get molded almost instantly into this powerful political weapon? Why did federal security officials call this an event of highest national significance?
Right. And what messages, both the spiritual ones and the more combative ones, were really being delivered there?
Exactly. We're unpacking all the sources so you can really see the unprecedented scale and, frankly, the significance of this as a potential turning point.
And our goal is to look at this impartially, lay out the source material from the faith declarations to the hard political promises. So you can see this event not just as something that happened, but maybe as a blueprint for how modern American conservative mobilization works. Let's jump straight into the sheer size of it, the spectacle itself. Okay, so the scale. Let's unpack that first, because the size alone really shaped the whole narrative, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about State Farm Stadium, Glendale, Arizona.
Yeah.
Basically filled to capacity. Sources are saying conservative estimates were, north of 100,000 attendees.
100,000 people. That's stadium concert level, Super Bowl level crowds. This wasn't just, a local church gathering.
No way. And the logistics must have been monumental. People were flocking there super early in the morning. Sources mentioned attendees lining up for hours. I read one woman said she left her home in Mesa at 3 a.m. just to get a decent spot.
3 in the morning, that's dedication. And it shows the organizational lift required, right? Filling a massive venue like that, it says a lot about the movement's infrastructure.
It really does. And what's fascinating, tied to that scale, are the immediate national security implications.
Yeah, you mentioned that. The Department of Homeland Security classified this memorial as an event of highest national significance.
Which is a crucial detail. It tells you everything about its political weight. That designation, it's typically reserved for things like, the Super Bowl, the presidential inauguration, maybe a major international summit.
Though it triggers a massive federal security response.
Exactly. It means because of the extreme political tension around Charlie Kirk's assassination, and critically, because President Trump was attending, federal officials basically rolled out the maximum security playbook.
So operationally, that means what? Enhanced security zones, Secret Service everywhere, high-level intelligence monitoring for domestic threats, political violence.
All of the above. Coordinated efforts across multiple federal and state and local agencies. The government itself was acknowledging, okay, this isn't just a funeral, it was a high-stakes national political flashpoint.
Yeah.
Demanded maximum attention.
Wow. Okay. And speaking of blurring lines, you said it was this defining characteristic, right?
Yeah.
That it was simultaneously a political rally and a religious revival.
Yes. Seamlessly blending maybe the most potent aspects of both. It wasn't accidental.
You saw conservative commentators like Benny Johnson explicitly rejecting the idea it was just a funeral. He called it a revival.
Right. And the structure was deliberate. You had these moments of spiritual testimony, worship music, and then boom. Intense political speeches woven right in.
And there was this central shared feeling, wasn't there? It got formalized pretty quickly in legislative language, like that proposed House Resolution 709. The idea that Kirk's assassination had to be a turning point for the nation, proof that he did not die in vain.
Which leads directly, almost inevitably, to the creation of what we can call the martyrdom narrative.
Martyrdom. So key figures like President Trump, Senator J.D. Vance, they didn't just mourn him in the traditional sense.
No, they immediately started praising him as a great American hero, and specifically a martyr for the Christian faith. The source material shows this rhetoric framing his death not as, some random tragedy, but as a direct sacrifice. a sacrifice in an ongoing culture war for conservative Christian values.
Okay, but hold on. The sources paint Kirk as a martyr for Christian faith. But a lot of critics would argue his main focus, his life's work, was really about secular political power, maybe provocation, definitely organizational expansion. So is this faith narrative purely a retroactive political spin? Or is there actual evidence in his work that supports this spiritual emphasis?
Well, that's a really critical distinction we need to make. While yes, his organization, Turning Point USA, TPUSA, focuses heavily on political organizing.
Right.
The sources analyzing Christian nationalism, people like Jeff Charlotte, for example, show how absolutely essential this martyrdom narrative is for that ideology. Charlotte noted how the framing, well, definitely rooted in Erica Kirk's very real, very raw grief, quickly shifted into something he even termed holy war.
Holy war! That's strong language.
It is, and the symbolism is critical because it introduces this concept of accelerationism.
Okay, let's clarify that for our listeners.
Yeah.
Accelerationism, that's the political idea that social and political conflicts need to be intentionally sped up, intensified to bring about a desired, often radical outcome.
Right. Exactly. So by labeling Kirk a martyr, his death instantly becomes this act of righteous sacrifice. And what does sacrifice demand? It demands immediate radical action, escalation from his followers.
So his death, framed as this attack on Christian conservatism, becomes the justification for moving faster, fighting harder.
Precisely. It taps into that deep emotional dedication many conservatives feel towards the idea of a Christian America, regardless of their personal level of piety. The memorial wasn't just about looking back, it was very much about weaponizing that dedication for the future. And to really understand how that political weaponization worked, you have to first grasp just the sheer moral weight that was established by Erica Kirk's testimony. It was incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It basically provided the spiritual foundation, you could say the moral high ground that the political leaders then instantly built their call to arms upon.
Her speech, the sources described it as both completely heartbreaking and yet utterly controlled somehow. She talked about just the unbearable shock, the horror of getting to that hospital in Utah, seeing her husband's body. But even in that moment of just profound personal grief, she explicitly invoked "Thy will be done," showing this total surrender to her faith, even when facing something incomprehensible.
And then came that defining moment, the one that really set the spiritual tone for, the 100,000 people listening. Her public act of forgiveness towards the killer, Tyler Robinson.
Right. She said it plainly. I forgive him because it was what Christ did and is what Charlie would do.
Her conviction was just crystal clear. The answer to hate is not hate. The answer we know from the gospel is love, and always love. I mean, that's a powerful, deeply personal declaration of grace right in front of the world.
It really was, and the sources reveal this, masterful sequencing. By establishing that overwhelming emotional and spiritual foundation through Erica Kirk's forgiveness, this message of profound grace, of surrender, that the political speakers who followed her were almost instantly granted this kind of moral authority to pivot. So let's analyze that pivot. How did the political establishment immediately leverage that spiritual gravity for temporal retribution?
The contrast couldn't have been sharper, really. Immediately after Erica's powerful words about surrender and love, President Trump takes the stage. And he escalates promises of political retribution against opponents. Sources quoted him when asked directly about, maybe lowering the temperature of political violence. He said, "I hate my opponent and I don't want the best for them."
Wow. So a complete shift.
A total shift. It demonstrated this strategic channeling of grief, not towards reconciliation, but towards renewed, aggressive political antagonism. Right away.
And other prominent figures jumped right on that mission too. Senator J.D. Vance, who's Catholic, he vowed to carry Kirk's legacy forward as a fight.
Yeah, Vance specifically stressed that Kirk, quote, would encourage me to be honest that evil still walks among us, not to ignore it for the sake of a fake kumbaya moment, but to address it head on.
So the focus snaps immediately, explicitly from personal grief to this high-stakes political mission demanding action now.
And we also really need to highlight Secretary of State Marco Rubio's presence there. It was remarkable.
What did he do?
He stood up in front of millions of people watching and delivered an explicit Christian testimony, like a literal gospel presentation on live television.
Really? The Secretary of State?
Yes. He detailed the message of sin and resurrection. He declared, quote, "Sin entered the world and separated us from our Creator. God took on the form of a man and came down and lived among us, and he suffered like men, and he died like a man. But on the third day, he rose unlike any mortal man.
That definitely elevates the whole platform, doesn't it? Beyond just politics. That gives it a spiritual significance you don't usually see at a rally, especially one so politically charged.
Absolutely unprecedented for an event like this, dominated by political figures. And then you had Tucker Carlson reinforcing this kind of hybrid message, faith and urgency.
What was his angle?
His argument was quite analytical, actually. He basically said, look, politics alone can't answer the deepest questions in life. The real solutions, he argued, were worshiping Jesus and repentance.
So it's this blend again. Faith provides the ultimate answer, but the political opponents are framed as part of the evil that needs to be fought.
Exactly. That blend is the core engine. It marries the spiritual revival aspect with the political rally aspect. That's what's driving so much of the current conservative movement.
And Erica Kirk, she didn't just talk about her own faith. She also issued a kind of spiritual mandate to the crowd, didn't she?
She did. She observed, that this tragedy had caused people to open a Bible for the first time in maybe a decade, or to pray for the first time since they were kids. And she challenged the believers in the audience directly. She said, all of you, those who are already believers, it is your job to shepherd these people. She urged them to recognize that these newcomers to faith needed guidance, needed protection.
And she had a specific message for women too, right?
Yes, a very specific challenge. She framed their role in this spiritual movement by calling on them to be virtuous. And she recognized motherhood as, quote, the single most important ministry you have.
Defining women as the guardians, the encouragers.
The preservers of this movement. And explicitly basing their strength in what she described as God's design for their roles. That message, you can bet, powerfully energized a really key demographic in the conservative base.
So you see the sequence: profound grief, followed by radical forgiveness, then a spiritual call to shepherd others, and almost immediately a political mandate to fight evil. It feels very strategically framed.
Deeply strategic. Designed to motivate, absolutely. Which brings us to you, our listeners. You're analyzing this right alongside us here on Kaizen. What do you think? What was the dominant message coming out of that stadium? Was it the spiritual call for forgiveness and revival? Or was it the political promise of retribution and combat?
Yeah, we want to know your take. Pause this deep dive for just a second. Which message stood out more to you? Was it faith or politics? Type F for faith or P for politics in the comments below. Or hey, if you think it was a perfectly balanced strategic tool, maybe type B for both. Let us know. Okay, so to really get a handle on the impact of that memorial, we need to look at the immense machinery Charlie Kirk actually built during his lifetime.
Right. He was so much more than just a podcaster or a commentator. He was really the operational genius behind the youth wing of the whole Machine movement.
A key ally, a primary confidant of Donald Trump going back to 2016.
Absolutely. And this wasn't just, volunteer activism. We were talking about massive financial power, serious organizational muscle built through Turning Point USA, TPUSA.
The numbers are pretty staggering. Sources analyzing their financials show TPUSA reported, $85 million in revenue in 2023 alone.
85 million, just let that sink in.
I mean, to put that in perspective, that's more than double what they brought in back in 2020, which was around $39 million. That suggests a huge influx of cash, right? Presumably from major conservative donors who see mobilizing young people as absolutely critical.
No question. And what does $85 million buy you in the political world?
Infrastructure, I imagine. Reach.
Exactly. That kind of funding translates directly into organizational power all across the country. At the time he died, TPUSA boasted something like 900 college chapters.
900 on college campuses.
And another 1,200 high school chapters. Think about that. It's a massive, decentralized army of young activists.
Wow.
Plus, their political arm, Turning Point Action, was getting really successful with voter mobilization, specifically targeting younger conservative voters, Gen Z.
Yeah, and analysts actually credit Kirk's relentless work with driving a measurable shift among Gen Z voters, a shift that contributed to Trump's margin of victory in Arizona, for example, in the last election cycle. A 5-point margin, the sources say.
He was making a difference there, statistically.
And the sources suggest maybe his tactical genius was his communication style. It seemed perfectly tailored for the digital age, especially on college campuses where he could just bypass traditional media gatekeepers.
Well, definitely. His method was simple, but incredibly effective. He'd set up a table, maybe a simple sign saying something provocative like, "Insert controversial topic, prove me wrong."
Right. Classic Kirk.
It was tactical genius, really. Critics argued, maybe rightly, that his goal wasn't really about reaching consensus or finding truth through academic debate.
Huh?
Instead, his method was designed, and I'm quoting here, to verbally defeat his opponents, crafting these short, punchy, confrontational narratives that were just perfect for Gen Z attention spans and, crucially, for social media virality.
Performance over consensus. Optimized for the clip, not necessarily the conclusion, like that surrounded format he used on YouTube where one person's debating a whole circle of ideological opponents.
Exactly. Content designed to be clipped, shared, and argued about online. And the numbers, they absolutely back this up.
Billions of views, right? His content, even the really controversial debate clips, got billions of views on social media in the months leading up to the election cycle.
Which is why people called him the youth whisperer of the American right.
Yeah.
That digital dominance was key.
And his rhetoric, it was totally uncompromising. You look at the sources detailing that debate he had on abortion.
Yeah, that was intense. He went way beyond typical conservative talking points.
He flatly opposed exceptions for rape,
Right.
even for a 10-year-old child. And he used ultrasound images during the debate to visually frame abortion as murder.
It's a high-stakes, no-compromise style. It guarantees massive engagement, but also massive polarization. There's no middle ground there.
And even his very final moments tragically reflect that confrontational debate strategy. It's deeply unsettling.
Right before he was shot at Utah Valley University, he was in the middle of a heated debate about mass shootings.
A student challenged him on the statistics, and Kirk's very last words, captured on recordings, were his characteristic combative reply: counting or not counting gang violence.
A fact-checking, confrontational point, right up until the very end.
Yeah.
Just pure Kirk style.
And the immediate impact of his death, operationally speaking, was actually a powerful testament to the organization he built.
Yeah, the assassination triggered this huge outpouring of support, didn't it? Sources confirmed donations just poured into TPUSA. They topped $6 million very quickly after his death.
$6 million, just like that.
And organizationally, TPUSA saw a surge in requests to start new chapters. Attendees at their youth summits were vowing to double down, to keep pushing Christian conservative values, using scripture to back up political opinions. His death, in a tragic way, seemed to galvanize the base he'd built.
So you see this massive funding, the $85 million infrastructure, the $6 million surge after his death, and this high-stakes, provocative, confrontational strategy. What's your take?
Thinking about the other side of the political aisle, should organizations over there adopt a similar strategy? High stakes, confrontational, designed for digital attention.
That's a huge question facing political strategists right now. We want your input on this. You are amazing Kaizen listeners. Should the opposition fight fire with fire? Type Y for, yes, they need that same energy. Or N for, no, they should stick to a different approach. Let us know right now. What do you think?
Okay, before we really dig into the political fallout, let's just quickly reiterate the known facts of the assassination itself, just for clarity.
Good idea. So Charlie Kirk was shot while speaking at a TPUSA debate event. This was at Utah Valley University.
It was quickly determined to be a targeted attack. Authorities arrested Tyler Robinson. Utah Governor Spencer Cox publicly noted that Robinson adhered to what he called leftist ideology and had apparently expressed dislike for Kirk online.
Right. Robinson was charged with aggravated murder and also commission of a violent offense in the presence of a child because there were children nearby. Prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty.
And what followed online was just chaos, a media firestorm.
Total chaos. Source reports indicate that really graphic video footage of the assassination itself reached millions of people, often autoplaying on social media feeds, which is horrifying.
Yeah, experts who study platform behavior noted the speed and the graphic nature of how it spread. They even compared it to how ISIS videos used to disseminate back in the day.
Wow. That's a disturbing comparison.
It really is. And it highlighted the fact that some platforms, like X, had significantly reduced their trust and safety staff, maybe prioritizing engagement, even violent engagement, over basic user safety.
And without verified facts readily available, wild speculation just rushed in to fill the vacuum.
Instantly. Conspiracy theories popped up, claiming all sorts of things. There were claims about inscriptions on the recovered rifles' bullet casings being related to transgender ideology.
Was that ever verified?
Senior law enforcement officials couldn't verify it, but that didn't stop prominent conservative figures from immediately using that unverified claim to call for action against the trans community.
And other theories.
Oh yeah. Speculation that the alleged shooter was connected to the far-right Groyper culture.
Okay, hang on. Groyper. Let's explain that. That refers to a sort of decentralized, often pretty extremist faction within the broader conservative and alt-right world, right? They're known for being hostile even to mainstream conservatives like Kirk, who they sometimes accused of not being radical enough.
Exactly. So the fact that this theory emerged immediately shows deep distrust, even within the conservative ecosystem itself. Maybe an attempt to deflect blame onto an ideologically inconvenient group.
And there were even wilder theories.
Oh, absolutely, including claims of involvement by Israel or Mossad. Things got so out there that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had to come out and officially reject them as insane.
Just a completely chaotic, high-stakes media environment. And that really set the stage for maybe the most stunning development after the assassination, this rapid political crackdown on perceived dissent. What you might call the free speech paradox at the heart of Kirk's memorializing.
It's a deep dive straight into irony, isn't it? Kirk's entire career, his whole brand, was built on vigorous debate, on the idea that, quote, disagreement is a healthy part of our systems.
Right.
Yet the political pressure cooker that resulted from his death led directly to the indefinite suspension of Jimmy Kimmel Live.
And that wasn't just ABC making a call, was it? The sources say it was more complicated.
Much more complicated. The show was suspended after explicit threats by the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, to punish ABC, the broadcaster. This was over comments Kimmel made criticizing the MGA response to the assassination.
What kind of threats?
FCC Chief Brendan Carr explicitly threatened possible regulatory actions, including potentially revoking their broadcast licenses, which is a huge threat for a network.
Wow, okay, that's serious government pressure.
It's a complex legal area. The FCC threat was apparently prompted because Kimmel said the Meiji gang was trying to score political points from the crime instead of genuinely grieving. Now, the First Amendment limits government restricting speech.
Right.
But legal analysts noted the FCC threat used the government's power to regulate broadcasting licenses. So it's not strictly censorship in the classic sense, but it's definitely a direct government threat leveraged against private media.
And the sources highlight the chilling effect that kind of threat has, right?
Absolutely. Law experts said even if the government doesn't actually violate the First Amendment directly, the threat itself creates this climate where broadcasters might self-censor or fire employees just out of fear of government's wrath, or maybe to curry favor.
And that's the paradox. A man whose life was all about free debate has his death used to justify political suppression.
And we saw this extend beyond just media into workplace retaliation, too. People who posted critical comments, maybe even celebrating Kirk's death online, found themselves targeted.
Yeah, J.D. Vance, for example, was encouraging people to contact the employers of anyone who celebrated the assassination.
Right. Sources looking at the legal environment describe this as fast-changing norms around free speech in the private sector. Well, yeah, many employees are at will and can technically be fired for almost any reason. Legal analysts pointed out the clear irony. These firings were often politically motivated, frequently following pressure from conservative figures online.
There was one legal analyst, Sam Goldstein, quoted summarizing the contradiction perfectly.
What did he say?
He said, "What a weird way to react in memory of Charlie Kirk, who was known for listening to people and disagreeing with them and moving on."
Exactly. The crackdown wasn't aimed at violence or direct threats. It targeted simple political expressions of dislike. That's a massive deviation from the norms of vigorous debate that Kirk himself supposedly championed. The establishment response seemed focused less on broad unity and more on leveraging his death to punish political dissent. #outro. So when you pull back and look at the whole picture, this memorial wasn't just an expression of grief, was it? It was really a masterclass in political engineering.
How so?
Well, it was this deliberate, incredibly powerful statement that absolutely cemented a narrative of martyrdom.
Yeah.
And it successfully channeled that profound personal sorrow into immediate, massive political will. It solidified the image of this young movement.
A movement that sees itself not just as, a political faction with an $85 million budget.
Right, but as something more, like a spiritual army fighting a high-stakes culture war. That emotional peak, Erica Kirk's forgiveness, was instantly and very strategically weaponized by the political speakers to really drive that narrative of the fight forward.
We've definitely seen that Kirk's life built this formidable movement, immense organizational capacity, serious fundraising power. But his death, it was instantly elevated, wasn't it? Weaponized as a revival, an organizing tool.
Absolutely.
So we leave you with this final, maybe provocative thought to chew on. You look at the sudden massive influx of donations, over $6 million pouring in. You see the surge in chapter requests for TPUSA. You see his status elevated to martyr, which gives the movement this unifying, almost existential purpose. Did Charlie Kirk's assassination, tragically, end up becoming the single most effective organizing, mobilizing, and even financial tool for the very movement he built?
It's a tough question, but one worth considering.
We really love hearing what stands out to you in these deep dives here on Kaizen. So, what's your final take? Was this memorial primarily a demonstration of authentic Christian faith, of grief finding its way? Or was it mainly a highly effective political strategy designed for mobilization and maybe even retribution?
Let us know.
Type F for faith, P for politics, or hey, if you think it was a perfect 50-50 split, type 50 below. You are such an essential part of this conversation. If you found this analysis valuable, do us a favor and hit that like button right now. It really helps. And if you haven't yet, please follow us immediately for more insightful deep dives just like this one. Thanks for listening.